there's no perfect solution, and it's easy to sit, in a nice modern, country talking on TV like I'm doing right now and talk about how, sides should not do something. Well, it's a whole different story when you're in Gaza City right now, right? So don't let the perfect be the enemy of good.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today, I've got Mick Mulroy on the show. He's a former US Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. And just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Mick, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be with you, Maddie.
Well, with your background, Mick, we have to start off with this unveiling of a 20-point plan for Gaza from Donald Trump alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They unveiled it yesterday at the White House. It includes instating a temporary post-Hamas government and a plan for peace in the area. So reading this plan, Mick, walk me through your thoughts on it when you read it.
So it really came across to me as a very comprehensive, concerted effort by the United States to be fair to both sides and to give both sides something that they would gain from agreeing to this plan. It started, of course, as a 21-point plan, I assume because Prime Minister Netanyahu called the Prime Minister of Qatar, didn't really apologize, but that's how it's being couched, and I think most importantly said that it wouldn't happen again, of course. That was one thing checked off. So I think that's why I went from 21 point to 20 point. But that was important, quite frankly, because they did violate the sovereignty of Qatar. Qatar was doing the mediation at the request of not only the United States but Israel, right? They were in the middle of passing a proposal by the United States, and they needed Qatar to get back involved to carry this 21-point plan to a final conclusion, which is now that Israel has accepted. I don't know of a country in the region who hasn't endorsed it. So all the GCC countries, now it has to be, and it was presented reportedly last night to Hamas. They have to make the determination of whether it's acceptable to them. But I do think it is a plan that would lead not only to an end to the war in Gaza, which needs to happen, the hostages being returned, Palestinian prisoners, including 250 that have killed Israelis and had life sentences. That's a big concession on the part of Israel. And humanitarian aid going back to the 600 trucks a day, that needed to happen. That's important. But it also goes very much into depth of, as you said, post-Hamas governance, a security and stabilization multinational force that transitions to a Palestinian force, and a path toward a potential two-state solution and an expansion of the Abraham Accord. So very comprehensive. Hats off to the drafters. I think it was Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner. We'll just have to see whether Hamas accepts it. If they don't, I don't know where we go from here.
Well, Mick, yes, as you mentioned, Israel has obviously accepted this. We're still waiting for Hamas. But from your expertise, if you could look at this plan from Hamas's perspective, is it in their best interest to sign it?
So right now, Hamas is a shell of what it was. I mean, we see their supporters basically claim that they are victorious simply because they're still alive. Well, it's clear, Gaza, if you look at before October 7th, Gaza was not a bad place to live. It was functional. There was an economy. There was the ability to at least in some parts, produce their own food. After it, about 90% of the buildings are unlivable. 66, I think, thousand people are now deceased. They have brought devastation to the people of Gaza. They have an out. Even in this, another concession of Israel, they can lay down their weapons and get amnesty. A big concession, obviously, for Israel, something that will probably come back to haunt the people that agreed to it when it comes to the civilians in Israel that suffered such a travesty on October 7th. But I think unnecessary. That's how negotiations happen, right? You have to concede things. And they give them safe passage out, right? The alternative is the IDF permanently occupies Gaza. They will hunt them down until they get at them all, and that could take another year potentially or longer, and that just can't happen with the level of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So they don't really have much of an option. They're not a viable, you know, terrorist force, but fighting force right now. So I think it's a concession in the sense, but they get a lot of benefits from it. If they actually do care about the Palestinian people, which I don't think they do, but if they claim to, then this is a benefit to them substantially. There's also a fund to reconstruct Gaza, which will take at least 10 years. In $100 billion, they have to remove all the unexploded ordnance. They have to redo the infrastructure, and then everything that goes into rebuilding, places for 2.2 million people to exist. So this is something that is certainly beneficial to the Palestinian people. Hamas gets an out, the ones that are still remaining. So I think, and of course, who's going to support them after this? Qatar supports it. Egypt supports it. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. These are the big countries in the Middle East. There is no country, to my knowledge, Turkey, I believe, supports it, that is going to support them if they don't sign on to this.
Mick, part of the 20-point plan comes down to governance, as we spoke about earlier. And so what it says is that Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. So how tough will this be to enforce this or even get Hamas to sign over government control in the first place?
So a lot of the senior Hamas leaders are dead, right? So we're talking mostly about young terrorists. And Israel has very good intelligence, I think they've proven that, except for the fact that October 7th happened. After that, they really came alive, Shin Bet and Mossad. They're going to have dossiers on everyone that's significant in Hamas. So they will know if an individual is trying to get back into government or governance, if you will, in a new Palestinian authority or revitalized authority, as it's being called, and they will block them. So if that's the case, and that should be the case, they shouldn't have any say in the future of Gaza. We saw what they did to Gaza, as I already mentioned. But it needs to be run by Palestinians, right? Palestinians who are more focused on improving the life of the men, women, and children in Gaza. Another part of the agreement is that there won't be any annexation of the West Bank, that there won't be any annexation of Gaza or a forced expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. That's absolutely critical for the chances of having a Palestinian state. So if Israel has agreed to that, that is a huge benefit to the Palestinian people. If Hamas turns this down, then the right of Israel, the right side of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet, already has been, but will then have the necessary impetus to start annexing part of the West Bank, to start trying to push out Palestinians from Gaza. I don't think it will be the right thing to do, but they will then say, look, we've conceded all of this, and Hamas said no. So they internally will have a lot more clout to start pushing for things that would make a two-state solution, which should be the policy, less likely to happen. So if there's large portions of the West Bank that are annexed, obviously if there's no Palestinians in Gaza, then the idea of a state is getting further and further and further away practically.
Mick, on that note, Trump, he also said that working with the World Bank and others, it will be responsible for recruiting and training a new government that will be made up of Palestinians alongside with highly qualified experts from all around the country. So just in terms of layman's terms, to really debunk what Trump means on this board of peace will literally be gutting Hamas's government, starting again by recruiting ordinary Palestinians to lead the state.
Right. I think what they're really looking for, and they use the term technocrat, right? So the Palestinian Authority compared to Hamas is obviously more attractive, but they're not attractive. They have been deemed incompetent, corrupt, and they're not trusted by the Palestinian people. It's just that they're not Hamas. So that's why the U.S., going back to the Biden administration, uses the term revitalized Palestinian Authority, because they're the only recognized authority. So what I think they would like to see, and according to the plan, former Prime Minister Tony Blair is going to lead this effort to put together technocrats, people that are Palestinian that have gone and learned how to do things like build an infrastructure, build an economy, how to best handle healthcare and education, and all the things that really need to happen by somebody who simply uses their position to personally gain from the global donations that have been happening for decades. So I think the idea is that would then transition to a governance of competent Palestinians, and there are plenty, and plenty are been educated in the finest schools, if you will, in the West. They are very capable to do this. A lot of them want to come home and rebuild their country. I think that's the plan, simultaneously with having this multinational security and stabilization force, which is necessary to allow the IDF to withdraw from population centers and then to withdraw from Gaza, and then transition to a Palestinian security force that has been vetted, trained, and focused more on keeping order than obviously attacking its neighbor.
Do you believe that this 20-point plan can be carried out properly, that this transition to peace in Gaza can be done without the help of US or allied troops on the ground, or even Tony Blair and the Board of Peace on the ground to facilitate it in Gaza?
So it can, yes. The Indonesian president, Prabowo, has, at least in his speech in the UN, offered up to 20,000 Indonesian forces. They will have to be trained. I mean, just being a soldier, I was a Marine, my son's a Marine, they're trained very highly, but you have to be trained as a peacekeeper. So there needs to be an effort to train his soldiers as peacekeepers. That's a specific skill that requires beyond, soldier skills. There's also going to be apparently other GCC countries that are going to be involved. They can do it. They're very capable. Their job is not to go and wage war, right? Their job is to go and secure the lines for humanitarian assistance to be brought in, to be distributed fairly and equitably under the humanitarian principles. And I've been involved a lot in humanitarian enabling in Gaza and other places around the world. That's very important it happens, so it doesn't just get stolen by factions that then sells it back to the people at high costs. But these are all things that a peacekeeping force can and should do. They need to be trained to do it, and I think it's fully within their capabilities to do that. Western countries need to assist, and then there needs to be Palestinians that are vetted, selected, and then trained to replace them eventually, because no country or entity that's going toward being a country wants to be completely governed by people outside of their country or guarded.
It's still very unlikely that Trump would station US troops in Gaza.
I think it's very unlikely that he would station U.S. troops in Gaza. It would look, and I guess it would be, a U.S. occupation that replaced the Israeli occupation, which to many Palestinians would look like the same thing. It would be a bad idea. I don't think there's any plan to do that. I think that's why they want to get forces from Muslim countries to be the ones that do this until there's a Palestinian force.
If this goes ahead, Mick, do you see this stabilising the broader Middle East?
I think it could go a long way to stabilize the broader Middle East. Part of the plan is to expand the normalization of relationships between Israel and other countries, namely Saudi Arabia, potentially Qatar and others, an expansion of the Abraham Accords. That's the intent. If countries become interwoven with their economy, it stabilizes the region anywhere. The Middle East, of course, is no different. So if more countries have robust diplomatic and economic relations with Israel, they are less likely to have a conflict with Israel. It just doesn't make sense. So that's the intent behind it, and it will, to the point of your question, Maddie, I think go a long way to stabilize the situation. There'll still be the Iranian factor, which is not involved in this.
Do you have concerns, Mick? So Donald Trump, he said basically if Hamas doesn't sign off on this proposal, then Israel would have the US's full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. So that could potentially mean that the IDF will continue their military operation at the cost of thousands, millions of Palestinian lives and potentially another attack on Qatari soil if Israeli intelligence points them in direction of any senior Hamas leaders in Qatar. Obviously, you mentioned that Netanyahu said that they wouldn't do that again, but we don't know how this thing will escalate if Hamas don't sign this agreement. So are you concerned on how this situation will escalate if Hamas don't agree to it, given Trump said that the US will give the full backing for them to finish the job?
So yes, I am concerned. I don't know exactly what they could do that's more intense than what's happening right now. I mean, Gaza City is a brutal fight. I mean, they're literally leveling buildings as they move forward, and there is a lot of casualties, civilian casualties. The humanitarian crisis is at IPC level 5 for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, which is the last phase before death. So, but it will continue, and that is something that we should all hope is not the case. So Hamas accepting this is really pivotal here, and it's definitely needed. No more equivocation. If they come back and say, no, we're not going to do this, or they do a counter proposal, bad things are going to happen in the sense that it's going to continue. And then there's what's the plan for that? I mean, Israel did concede several things that they didn't want to concede. And that's something that I don't know what else where would the U.S. go from here? Where would the international community go from here? France signed on to this. Some of the countries that I think just about every country that had recently recognized Palestine as a state is signing on to this plan. So if Hamas would be literally in an island by itself if they don't. And I don't know where we would go from here. I don't know how this plan could be, made better for them to agree to this. But another part of the plan is if they don't agree to it, Israel is just going to create, I think they're calling them humanitarian zones. And I imagine they're going to let women, children, and the elderly in, and any fighting age male that they can't vet as not Hamas will be left out. And so they'll move forward with this plan, sort of, with those, and leave these like no man land, literally, out there for the fighting to continue. I don't see that as being much different than what's happening right now. I mean, they're already doing this. And that's certainly not good for the Palestinian people, and it's certainly not good, I think, for the Israeli people. So I think this plan is, and again, negotiations or compromises on both sides. So if one side's happy and the other side's not, it wasn't really much of a negotiation. So I think we're in the right spot. It's now really going to come down to Hamas to either agree to this in the war for the benefit of the Palestinian people and even their own benefit, right? Or they're going to continue. And if they continue, they're going forward with, potentially only the support of Iran. They will literally only have the support. They shouldn't have any support in the West if they turn down this.
So, Mick, you're not looking at this proposal thinking it's wishful thinking from the West to be proposing these things, or is there anything? Have you poked holes in the proposal at all?
So, I mean, I've certainly seen people poke holes in the proposal about what it does, what it doesn't do. Is it too pro-Israeli? I'm not saying that the holes they're poking aren't fair. I'm simply saying there's no perfect solution, and it's easy to sit, in a nice modern, country talking on TV like I'm doing right now and talk about how, sides should not do something. Well, it's a whole different story when you're in Gaza City right now, right? So don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. And the way forward is, I don't see any alternative to this plan. And that's not to criticize the people that wrote the plan. But this is, if people aren't supporting this, my guess is they have very little stock in actually the consequences of not supporting it. So I would hope, as somebody who spent my whole career in conflict zones and now works on humanitarian issues, that people would view it from their perspective, not just, to walk out and go to a rally right next to your house, which has very little consequences, personally consequences to the people in the rally, right? So this is a matter of life and death, and I think, whether you agree with all of it or not, I don't see the alternative. So I hope people would look at it from their perspective.
The difference with Mick is that it's not so much about stabilizing the region or stabilizing the conflict. It's also about longevity and getting Hamas out as a governing body and setting up setting up Palestine for prosperity and to be able to govern their own people and to be able to build it into an amazing place to live. As you mentioned, quite a few Palestinians who had fled the state will be returning to hopefully restore it to what it's meant to be. So let's move on to kind of what's happening with Russia, Ukraine. Now, the US government is weighing up whether to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine so they can strike further into Russia. JD Vance, he said that this was still under consideration, but that Europe may end up buying these missiles off the United States and then give them to Ukraine, something we've, of course, seen before with other military equipment. So given how successful Ukraine has been at striking into Russia, especially targeting these oil refineries, is it necessary for these to be sent immediately to Ukraine, or are you worried that this might escalate the situation?
It's necessary to send them immediately to Ukraine. This is one of the things that I would criticize going back to the Biden administration of the U.S., of just wringing our hands and then eventually deciding to do it, right? So we did that with F-16, we did that with HIMARS, we did that with M1 Abrams tanks, we did that with everything, right? And then we eventually approve it, and the Ukrainians have lost ground while we're deliberating it, right? And did it escalate? And what's to escalate? I mean, Russia has invaded Ukraine. They're intent on taking over the entire country. They're attacking and specifically trying to kill civilians. So I don't know why we equivocate and debate this. I think we can't change the past, but if I was the national security advisor to President Biden, I would have said, right when we knew Russia was going to invade Ukraine, we should have sent a message. We will approve everything they need to defend themselves against your unlawful and unprovoked invasion. We're not going to, as soon as you go cross the line of departure, as we call it, everything's approved, except for nuclear weapons, right? And then we want to have this public debate constantly to where we are now, which we're still doing.
Several military analysts have said to me that, the Biden administration's rule that Ukraine couldn't strike into Russian land was basically telling Ukrainian troops that they had to fight with one arm behind their back. Is that the kind of way that you see it?
Yes, absolutely. Once we should support them to win. We have been supporting them not to lose. And thanks to the not only the bravery, but the absolute skill of the Ukrainian military, they have taken what we thought was a superpower and halted them, right? I mean, most analysts, when I was on, talking like this right here when it kicked off, and most analysts were saying 3 days to Kyiv, maybe 3 weeks, and now we're over 3 years, right? So the Ukrainians are fully capable of fighting and beating Russia. They're outnumbered, but if they had the spigot turned off, which is why it's so important to go to these secondary sanctions, because Russian economy is basically energy, period. They don't really sell anything else. So if we could cut India and China and Turkey from buying their oil and gas, they wouldn't have the money to continue the war. And I do think, and we should already do that. There's a bill that is sitting in the Senate, has 85, supporters, which is unheard of in modern American politics, to sanction countries that buy Russian gas 500%. I think that would work. And to Trump's point, President Trump's point, European countries should stop buying completely all Russian energy.
I mean, Mick, we've been waiting for months and months for Lindsey Graham's bill to reach the Senate floor, and we can only guess why it has been stalled, whether Donald Trump has been eager to kind of figure this out on his own without a bill, and he's been trying to get these, and there's also a lot of concern over why he's not reprimanding China in the same way he's done to India. And we'll get into that because I want to ask you about Taiwan. But before we end on that, I want to read out this quote from Putin. He said that our fighters and commanders go on the attack in the entire country. All of Russia is waging the righteous battle and working hard. Together we are defending for our love for the motherland and the unity of our historical destiny. We are fighting and we are prevailing. So that was Vladimir Putin on Monday. That was a speech that he said. So, I mean, Mick, is Russia prevailing or are they failing the way that Donald Trump would describe it at last week's UN General Assembly? We saw this insane, amazing switching gears from Donald Trump to truly be backing Ukraine the way that we'd hoped that he would. So what's the real story here? What's the Russian propaganda? Are they failing or are they prevailing?
They are failing. I mean, their intent was to actually take the country. They have taken, what, 18% of the country, and it's largely completely devastated, right? So it's not a place that you can farm or do anything, right? It's completely covered by unexploded ordnance. It is, every town is destroyed. I think, and I agree with you, Maddie. It was a shift. It was a welcome shift to hear President Trump start talking about Ukraine winning in the sense that they take back the entirety of their territory that was lost to Russia. I think it likely came from two things. I don't know. This is speculation. Intelligence that said Russia does intend to go past Ukraine, that they have specific intelligence that they do, which would potentially draw on the United States because of Article 5 if it's a NATO country. So that's something obviously President Trump doesn't want to see. And that they see a path toward victory, the intelligence analyst for Ukraine. If we can cut off the supply of funding for the war, if we can increase the capabilities of the Ukrainians, that could be the magic that leads toward Ukraine starting to take back territory, and then Russia making the decision either to really come to the table, which might be too late because if Ukraine can win, they're not going to just give away territory, or actually get pushed out of the country. So I am all about when you go to war, you go to war to win. And in this case, Ukraine didn't go to war. They were forced to go to war. But you go to war to win. And I think the supporters of Ukraine should have the same view. It's not just to keep them from losing, because all that does is perpetuate the war. We have to give them all the necessary. We should look at what we would need collectively, NATO, to win the war if we had what Ukraine had against Russia. So they have what they have on manpower, but what about the weapon systems? What about the approvals? Like you said, why are we handicapping that they can't strike somewhere in Russia? I mean, we're not going to give weapon systems that attack civilians because that's what Russia does, and they're terrorists. But we should take nothing off the table when it comes to valid military targets.
And I guess we'll be waiting to see if Donald Trump's remarks last week lead to more military aid for Ukraine, more congressional approvals on that. So we'll be waiting to see what happens there. But I want to finish off with what's really happening with Trump and Xi Jinping, Mick, because reports have been circulating that Donald Trump has been withholding $400 million worth of aid for Taiwan. And this is in the lead up for his meeting on the sidelines at APEC next month. The Wall Street Journal is now reporting that Xi Jinping is seeking a major shift in US policy. He wants the Trump administration to formally state that it opposes Taiwan's independence. For the US, this could mean a trade deal. It could mean tackling fentanyl, could mean a TikTok deal, just in terms of what the US would get out of this. So do you think we will see Donald Trump prioritizing a trade deal and all of these extra benefits with China over supporting Taiwan?
Good question. There is a law, the Taiwan Relations Act in the United States that requires, and we self-imposed, of course, but it's a law passed by Congress, signed by the president, requires the U.S. to adequately support Taiwan to defend themselves. So it's required that what he's withholding is actually required by law not to do. It doesn't mean we have to go to their defense, although we could in the act. That's obviously a decision by the president and Congress. But it does say we specifically have to actually provide them the needed equipment, weapon systems to defend themselves. So if that is not happening, and you're correct, it's not happening, that's a problem. I don't know if this Congress will hold President Trump accountable for that. But apparently not, right? I haven't heard hardly anything from anybody about this. Yeah. So yes, you're right. It is under wraps. I hope we're not going to trade away a partner in Taiwan for an economic gain. I understand the importance of economic gains. I would like to be more, the world to be closer economically because it means the likelihood of war is much less, right? That's just how it works. But we should, and we have an ambiguous stance on Taiwan, China, right? So we recognize there's one China. We support Taiwan's ability to defend itself against China, even though there's one China. And we've had this policy of strategic ambiguity. Like, we won't say whether we'll defend Taiwan from either a naval blockade or amphibious invasion, but that's to leave it up in the air. I would say that how we support or don't support Ukraine is probably going to have a big impact on whether China decides to take military action against Taiwan. If they don't think we're strong with our partners, they might say, okay, well, and then of course this is just going to lead more toward a potential likelihood that they would take military action against Taiwan.
Mick, several analysts would indicate that China is aiming for a 2027 attack on Taiwan, that's what they've been gearing up for. So if Xi Jinping feels that Donald Trump is swaying towards what he wants, that he's able to buy him over with trade deals, with the cracking down on fentanyl, with the TikTok deal, with anything else that will help the United States, do you think he will attack Taiwan and invade Taiwan?
So an amphibious invasion is a very, very complicated endeavor. And with the modern weapon systems, in other words, these ship-killing missiles that are now hypersonic, it would be a very difficult military problem. And the geography of Taiwan would make it even more difficult. And they already have the weapon systems necessary to successfully repel it. So it would be a very significant undertaking. I don't think China's ready for that. Certainly not 2027.
Mick Mulroy, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.